What's going on, Forceful players? Ryan F. and Miles here with a video today to talk about the Wanderer format, the Wanderer ban list, the Wanderer committee, and just an overall card-by-card analysis of some cards that I think maybe should or should not be on the ban list. Maybe just some kind of talking points about where the power level of Wanderer should be, and if we have a certain expectation of what the format should look like, where these cards should fall on that spectrum, and that's kind of the gist of it. So let's get right into it. Obviously, the first card that I have on the screen is going to be Horn of Sacred Beasts. This card is very clearly banned because of the interaction with Yggdrasil, the Tree 2, as it's commonly called. And I think that that's an interesting discussion to bring up because I think that this card has some very powerful applications in general. I don't think that the card itself is especially oppressive in any way. I think that a lot of the decks that abuse the graveyard are not as hard countered by Evil Elemental Uprising as some people would like to believe. When you look at cards like March of the Dead, when you look at cards like Command of Life and Death, just those by themselves, they're already inherently cheating tempo. So, for example, Command of Life and Death brings back an Athenia, for example, or any 3-drop really. But you're paying 2 to get back something that costs 3. When you play March of the Dead, you're paying 1 to get back something that costs 2. So when you play Dance of Shadows, you're paying 4 to get back something that costs 7. You're usually being tempo efficient by playing out of your graveyard. And the supposed downside to this is that you have to put forth some sort of effort, some other turn, some other effect, some other resource to get those cards into your graveyard. But because we're of the unbanning of Guinevere, the existence of Dark Alice Rabbit Princess, the existence of Invitation to Purgatory, the existence of Harvesting Season, I think that it's just incidental or honestly an upside to put these cards into your graveyard way too easily. So I think that Horn of Sacred Beast, specifically in the Wanderer format and just like the power level that that kind of brings, I think that it's okay to have something that costs 0 be able to interact with those strategies and force your opponent to sort of deal with that to be able to really be abusive. Because, for example, if I play Horn of the Sacred Beast and you want to do something out of your graveyard and then I use the Horn, first of all, the Horn is telegraphed. Like, I have to already have it there before you try to do the thing to use your graveyard for this to really punish you. And then on top of that, I think that Horn of the Sacred Beast is interactable with cards like Hera, or not really Hera, but like there's a lot of things now in the game that kill entities. So when you kill entities, Regalia just kind of falls under that umbrella. So I think that there's enough interaction with Horn that having it cost 0 just to kind of spike certain types of abusive strategies is completely okay. So with that said, I think that in order to allow Horn to exist in the format and deal with these type of strategies, you obviously have to unfortunately ban Tree 2. And I don't think this is a bad thing either. I did kind of begin this idea of a video by thinking about how Divinity is just kind of the strategy that is coming out on top in most situations in Wanderer. I don't think that Tree is too far behind. I think that as we see the white-red Lenneth deck bring even more interaction with the Remove from Game Zone, Yggdrasil just has too easy an access to be able to abuse it and to just remove cards from game. Where normally removing cards from the game should, again, require some sort of investment of resources or time. Yggdrasil just uses it as a life total, so it automatically, in order to try to win the game against Tree, you are actively fueling their win condition, and you're not really doing so in a meaningful way when there are so many cards that just reload the deck. When you look at even just the white and red stuff that just came out, you can you can use Light of Raise and Revive to bring back an Athenia. Athenia can untap your stones or tap down your opponent's stones, and then you can use a green to just put a card on top of your deck and almost get perfect draws. Calico Cat also helps with this now. The idea, Chant of Tranquility, there's a lot of cards that just select cards to put to the bottom of your deck so you get perfect draws while also preventing yourself from losing the game. And then those perfect draws can pull into more and more infinites. And because I think that there are enough powerful cards now in the game that a 60 card deck is just statically good. I even think you could build 40 card tree or just a smaller than 60 card tree, and just people will not be able to kill you fast enough to actually stop you from winning the game. We know that aggro is just not very strong in Wander right now because there are way more interactive tools than there are aggressive tools. So I think that letting Tree go to bring back Horn is something that we should really have a talk about. And I know a lot of players in Wanderer really like Yggdrasil, Malefic Verdant Tree, and I think it is unfortunate that we would consider banning this card. And I think that's something to think about as well, because we do want the format to be fun for everybody. We do want as many different strategies to flourish as possible. But the question becomes, okay, if you're playing a deck and you cannot interact with Tree's Infinite, then you just can't be a deck, or you can't beat Tree. So is Tree keeping more decks out of the format than it is than it's bringing to the format by existing? And I think there's only a handful of Tree types, and I think it's really threatening a lot of things that will not be able to exist because the deck archetypes will just not have the tools to interact with it in a meaningful way, because anything that can interact with Tree can interact back with, for example. So if you do have instant speed burn, if Tree plays, Light of Raise and Revive on a Kaguya, obviously you can't do Kaguya anymore, but just like counter spells, like a whole bunch of different stuff because of the existence of the stuff that the Lenneth set has brought. Algernon can search any spell. Perfect Loki can nuke any board. Just a whole bunch of different resonators can do things when you can Light or Raise and Revive it back. And like, I'm just kind of harping on that card because it's the most recent thing, but I think Tree has kind of been fringe playable for a long time now. So it's not to just say that the Leno stuff pushes it over the edge. I just think that Horn is a card that couldn't come back because it's not inherently powerful. It's honestly just a -1 to nuke your opponent's graveyard, and they can see it coming. Even though it's instant speed, you have to put it on the board and it has to be there. It's interactable before they dump the cards they went to in the graveyard. So I think that Horn is a better card for Wanderer than Yggdrasil Malefic Tree. Next up, I have Wall of Wind, is a card I want to talk about. I actually think this card could be banned, and it's not obvious, right? Like, it's definitely frustrating to play against, but it falls off late game. You can play around it. There's a whole bunch of arguments to why this card isn't that good, and I didn't even really play this card when it was in New Frontiers too much. But with Wanderer, I think with cards like Explore the Unknown, where turn 1 Sacred Elf is just disgustingly easy to do, and I don't think that Sacred Elf or Elvish Priest or Explore the Unknown should be banned. Green is the color of ramp, and then the counterplay to Wall of Wind is play off tempo. Do not tap all of your stones, right? When your opponent is getting more ramp than you, and then is using that ramp to ramp more, and all the while you have to play around a card like Wall of Wind, whether or not your opponent has it, the existence of this card in the format makes you play suboptimally. And the counterpoint to that is, okay, well, play into it. Well, if you ever play a card that costs more than 1 mana, you are actively falling behind on tempo against the color with ramp. I don't think that's acceptable. I don't think either of those arguments is very good for how to beat this card. I don't think playing into it is good. I don't think playing around it is good. I think it's just problematic on all accounts. And that said, like, it's not something I've ever like really thought too much about. But as I was playing the Green White Mirrors over the past couple of weeks, I'm just like, man, like, this card is not good. It's not healthy. I'm not having a good time playing against it. I'm not having a good time playing with it. Like, my opponent played a card, they tapped out, I countered it for 1. Like, it almost feels like the old days of Otherworld Dream Severing Winds. Like, there's just almost nothing you can do about it. So just like the play patterns to beat this card are not fun, are not interesting, are not interactive. And in a game in a format especially where your opening hand is going to kind of be very consistent, and the tempo of the format, like how quickly you can get things on board, get your combo going, get your damage to your opponent's face, and make sure they can't play any cards. Like, the Green White Mirrors were kind of just get one dude on board and then stop playing cards, let your opponent try and play a card, counter it, and then untap and just have all your resources back again. With Kaguya gone, there's an argument that maybe Wall of Wind won't be nearly as frustrating as I've made it out to be, but I still think that in order to push aggressive strategies and allow aggro to breathe in the format and to even have a chance against decks like Green, I really think that Wall of Wind should be re-examined as a card that we consider a problem. Moving on from that, this might be even more controversial than what I just said. I think Otherworld Dreams might be something that is more interesting than Wall of Wind, and something that we could look at as actually coming back into the format. When Otherworld Dreams was Wanderer legal for a bit, it was in the Scheherazade format, and Scheherazade ran the format, and Otherworld Dreams was quickly banned after that tournament. But I think that now, with Guinevere back, with Dark Alice in the format, with Divinity, there's a lot of card draw. There is a lot of ways to have a lot of cards in your hand. I think even in New Frontiers, hand size has gone up over time. Even on like turn 5, turn 6, people just have 10 card hands. Even like the Melgus decks in New Frontiers, they're just going like 1-drop, Leviton, Stranger, play 2 1-drops on turn 3. Like they're playing a lot of cards, but they're still maintaining hand size very, very well. And I'm not sure if I can really point to any one card that allowed this to happen, but I think in general hand sizes are bigger. And if we are going to think about banning Wall of Wind, we're banning Wall of Wind. Fire Spell's already banned. Severing Winds is already banned. We just banned Kaguya. Like, counterspells are kind of taking a beating. And the counterspells that still exist in the format are not really all-inclusive enough to be playable in a game like Force of Will. Like, Keen Sense is not going to stop a lot of what the top decks are doing. And I honestly, I can't even speak to what the top decks are right now because we just had the shakeup of the meta, so it's really hard to say. But usually Resonators are good. Perfect Loki is a good card. I think Athenia is a good card. And again, I'm focusing on DVV because I've been playing a lot of New Frontiers, but like Resonators are still kind of running the format, I feel. And even if they're not, 1-cost cards are running the format. Just the efficiency and just of Force of Will always hitting your stones on each consequent turn. Tempo is and has always been just super, super important. So two-cost counterspells just are not actually good unless they're ubiquitous and can cancel everything, especially Resonators. So Otherworld Dreams is really interesting because it kind of functions like a discard spell, but it puts the decision-making process onto your opponent to actually decide if you have Otherworld Dreams, how am I going to play around that, and then how do I play into that? So if we no longer have Severing Winds in the format, and we no longer have Kaguya, the only like follow-up to Otherworld Dreams is something like Seal of Wind and Light. But because of how much card advantage exists and how often people will have multiple resources in their hand, I think this card becomes super, super interesting to allow into the format, and I think it might be a good time where it's okay to let this be, right? So if you go Elvish Priest in turn 1 and hold up Otherworld Dreams, and I go, okay, well, here's my 1-drop, and you go, actually, it's kind of scary, let me counter it, and then I play a scarier 1-drop, or maybe I play my less scary 1-drop, and then I have to get into something. Maybe you just don't want to cancel 1-drops with Otherworld Dreams. That's fine, but now you start getting into your 2 and your 3-drops, playing stuff like that. I play Athenia, you cancel it with Otherworld Dreams. I go, okay, Command of Life and Death, and then, oh, look, I just got the Athenia anyway, you wasted a card, nothing happened. You got a card out of my hand, but like, I think there's just more interesting options to play around it. And maybe I'm just over-exaggerating this. This is like my least confident card I've put on this list to talk about. But because the interaction is there between you and your opponent, because the opportunity to play around it is not inherently punishing, I think it's a card that we could look at as maybe coming back into the format. Umur to Will. This big old boy has been a hot topic of discussion for a very long time in Wanderer, and I am on the fence where I don't like him. I don't think that Heroic Epic on turn 2 with Energize and to win the game is healthy gameplay. I don't think that the backup of, oh, you actually stopped my combo, well, good thing I played Dance of Shadows on 4 and did it anyway, is healthy gameplay. I think that with the addition of the Rune deck, the consistency of, even if you don't see Heroic Epic or Umur to Will, you have Demon Division, you have Invitation to Purgatory, produce red, play Book of Ebon. You have a lot of consistent ways to just Umur, and then there's a multiple win conditions for the deck now. You've got the traditional Phaley library shadow clone jutsu deck that just makes a bunch of tokens and kills you. You've got the Alice Palace, Zeus Alice Flame Sprite combo, where you just take a Flame Sprite with 8,000 attack and hit your opponent in the face. I think that the combo itself doesn't rely on a lot of pieces. So the extra deck space can be designed and dedicated to interacting with the way your opponent is going to interact with you. So, for example, how do you beat, if you going to a Wanderer tournament and you know that the meta is going to be Umur to Will combo, and you know that everyone's bringing Umur, how are you going to beat that? Well, you could play counter spells to counter the Heroic Epic, and then counter the Dance of Shadows, counter the Book of Ebon, all of that. But the Umur deck is going to be base black because they need to play Heroic Epic. They're going to be black-red. And then they're going to play Look of Corruption. They're going to play Glint of Insight. They probably even have room for Thought Control. So they get to look at your hand and take out whatever counterspell they think is important. And then once they see your hand and see that, oh, I took out this counterspell, but you still have this counterspell, well, I'm going to wait now until I draw more counterspells to get rid of or more discard spells to get rid of the rest of your counterspells. And you've even got Tears of the Fallen in the Rune deck if they're so inclined. I think they just have a lot more ways to interact with you, and especially because of Glint of Insight, because Glint of Insight can take out multiple copies of the same card. And like I said, we just banned Kaguya. How many counterspells do you realistically have to interact with Umr? Well, if you want to play Keen Sense and you want to play Millennia Bond and you want to lose to Resonator-based decks, then sure, you are allowed to. But I don't think that's really an option. It's pretty much just Lorite and then Seal of Wind and Light and maybe Otherworld Dreams. But anyway, I think that discard just kind of rips that apart very consistently, especially with Kaguya being gone. Because like when I played the green and white deck against Umr, it was like, okay, if you're gonna discard my hand, that's cool, but then I'll explore into a Kaguya once you've already taken a peek. So now you can't just Umr on 3, you have to wait until 4 to discard spell and Heroic Epic, and then by then I've played like aggressive things and started hitting you, and that's kind of how you play that matchup. But now it's like you've really only got 8 realistic counterspells in the form of Seals and Lorites, so it gets a bit more complicated. And because they have the discard, I think it's very easy for them to play around certain things. Another way that you can beat Umr if you're going into an Umr dedicated format is that you can discard their hand. So you can discard their Heroic Epic. You can look at their hand and say, oh, okay, you have Heroic Epic? Well, now you don't have Umr. Oh, you have neither piece? Well, here's one piece. I'll get rid of that. The problem with that is the graveyard recursion, right? So now they can just Invitation to Purgatory a Dance of Shadows and then play the Dance of Shadows from their graveyard to bring back the Umr. So, of course, you can counter that with Evil Elemental Uprising is the most efficient answer, or Rezar the Resonator, or Heart of the Sacred Beast. But, like, you are never going to be more efficient. You need to... They get to look at your hand with their discard spells to look at your spells that can possibly remove their graveyard. So then when you do go through the process of removing their combo pieces, and then they go through the process of removing your ways to interact with Dance of Shadows, they end up on top, they get their combo off, and they kill you. So I think that the back and forth interaction, because of, with the Alice Palace especially, like because of how much the Umr combo deck space is not dedicated anymore, I still think the deck is not like insanely good, but when the deck just draws well and then your opponent also draws well, I think that the Umr deck is going to come out on top. And I don't think that this really oppressive combo deck for decks that, like, it's oppressive in the sense that anything that's not tier 1 is just probably going to lose to it. Like, you have to have a pretty dedicated strategy specifically to beating Umr and to not lose a game as early as turn 2 on the coin. And I think that's just not really the power level that I personally would want the format to be at. But with that discussion said, let's say that maybe it is the power level we want the format to be at. In that case, I think that there's an argument to talk about Pumpkin Witch. Pumpkin Witch costs 3, but when you play this card, it does not say win the game. In fact, you need a bunch of other cards in tandem with Pumpkin Witch to be able to win the game. So if Umr is out here with Heroic Epic plus Umr, or Invitation to Purgatory plus Book of Avon, there are specific ways you can interact with it. You can cancel you have cancel spells, you can cancel enter abilities, Pumpkin Witch. Like, for example, if you have an Abdul, Umr won't enter. But if you have an Abdul, when Pumpkin Witch enters, nothing will happen. The only difference here, I think, is that Umr is also vulnerable to Resonator-based removal. So if you kill the Zeus Alice, or if you kill the Flame Sprite, or if you kill the Umr on the Phaley combo, you have that option to beat it. With Pumpkin Witch, you can't just kill the Pumpkin Witch, but because they have to play more Resonators to actually like do something scary, I think that Resonator removal is almost as efficient against Pumpkin Witch as well. Now, there could be some Infinite that I'm just like not thinking about, and honestly, I haven't put too much thought into it because of how long this has been out of the format. Obviously, Resonators with Exhaust abilities are going to have a field day, especially if there's some Resonate like exhausts and then returns itself to its hand, and that probably exists. And again, I haven't thought about it, but in terms of why Pumpkin Witch was banned in the first place, it really was just killing you. It was just like doing Gwyber things in the format long past. So if we're saying that Umr is okay, and it's okay to play 3 mana win the game in a deck where the rest of the cards in the deck can be discard spells and Lorite and interaction without those extra like maybe 12 or 20 combo pieces, So if literally half your deck is interaction, I think Pumpkin Witch necessitates your deck building to be more Resonator focused. And again, this is barring some OTK, FTK combo that I completely overlooked, which is possible. But if there is one, let me know in the comments for sure. I think Pumpkin Witch is a card that we should look at it coming back, because I think it's interesting in that you get to enable these bum rush Pumpkin Witch OTK style decks that play a lot of Resonators. I think that's pretty interesting. For example, Athenia again is another Resonator that comes to mind as something that'd be really cool here. If you go like Pumpkin Witch, then play Athenia, then attack with Athenia, then Power of Immortality, sack it, bring back something that can res guys. I don't know, Rachel, the Rachel Resonator that like costs 3, and then you like sack another Resonator to bring the Athenia back from graveyard. There's probably some shenanigans, and I think that's like a really cool combo. And I think because it's slower than Umer, I think there's no reason that we shouldn't be allowing perhaps Pumpkin Witch to come back in the format. And finally, the last card I want to talk about is going to be Play Dead. Play Dead was banned about the same time as Otherworld Dreams, if memory serves. And I think that it was definitely spooky at the time because of all the things it was doing with Cthulhu. And I think it's still spooky now because of the errata on enter abilities since back then, where now you can play dead anything with an enter and then sack it and then bring it back, and that'll be cool. Obviously, cards like Altar of the Dead, Altar of the Undead Lord, Altar, you know what I'm talking about, has come out where like sacking things is very easy. Guinevere has been unbanned. Dark Alice has been unbanned. Ryan, what are you thinking? Why do you want to bring back Play Dead when there are so many ways to sacrifice Resonators? Well, I think that the actual cost of this card is the strength counters. How do you get strength counters? You have to play Kirik, and then you're not Divinity, or you have to play a mono redstone, which I think is actually a pretty big liability when these cards that we're talking about, like Dark Alice and Altar, are in non-red colors. I think mono red, like you have to see your mono redstone to even get the counters, and then you have to see some non-redstone to find an activator for it. I think that's interesting. I think perhaps just playing Kirik and doing the same thing we did back in the day with Rook Egg and Cthulhu with Play Dead, I think that would be like an interesting not even non-viable addition to the format that we have right now. So I think a card like this and a card like Pumpkin Witch would go a long way to bringing aggro, or making aggro great again, if you wanna put it that way. And again, these are not by any means guaranteed or anything. It's just kind of discussions, right? Like, what happens if Play Dead comes back? Is it really a ban-worthy card anymore? Is this something that, yes, getting Cthulhu 4 times is frustrating, but we've already said that Lorite's fine. We've already said that Umer's fine. We've already said that Tree 2 infinite loops are fine. So, like, is this really the problem? How, like, can we diversify the amount of decks that we see to allow different types of things to exist? And then, if the answer is no, then how are we going to evaluate Play Dead or Pumpkin Witch versus Umer or Wall of Wind or Otherworld Dreams? How can we just kind of shake things up to make things interesting for players? Look at what cards players want to see, because ultimately we are looking for competitive balance. That is the number one priority, I think, of a ban list. But at the same time, there is not one type of competitive balance. I think that there are cards that cannot exist in the format with other cards, and then it requires a bit of nuance to say, okay, which ones are we comfortable allowing and which ones do we think we want to take away? For example, like Tree 2 and Horn. So with all those kind of things coming into consideration, again, Play Dead, I think, will help enable very red-based aggro decks to actually be closer to viability than they currently are. And right now, I think they're not viable at all. And I don't think it would be oppressive, I think, given the power level that we see Wanderer at right now. So that is my thoughts on the Wanderer format, and just some cards that, you know, I'd like to enter a discussion with. So if you have any ideas of cards that you think could be banned or could be unbanned, for example, or if you want to talk about anything I talked about in this video, please make sure to comment down below. And thank you very much, guys. I'll see you next time.